What's up, smart homers? My name's Aaron, and welcome to part 2 of my ultimate presence sensor review. In this video, I want to show you 6 more presence sensors that work with Home Assistant. All of these have been sent to me by the manufacturers for me to test out, so I'll test them out and let you know what I think. As a prerequisite though, you're gonna need to watch part 1 of this comparison. There I went over what a millimeter wave presence sensor is, and there I covered 18 different millimeter wave presence sensors. So watch that one first, then come back here. Go ahead. Seriously guys, go ahead and watch it. Click up there, watch it, and then come back here. All 6 of the devices in this video work with Home Assistant, and I'm not testing them out with any other platform, although some may work with other platforms, but most of them are only gonna work with Home Assistant. At the end, I'm gonna tell you which ones are my favorites and which are my least favorites, and I'm gonna compare my experience with these to the ones in the previous video. The first one we're gonna look at is a millimeter wave presence sensor from Seed Studio. It's specifically meant to work with Home Assistant via ESP Home, and it has a really clean looking case. Unlike other presence sensors we've looked at in the past, I think it blends in well on a shelf or other location, and it just looks good. You can see that on one side it's powered by USB-C. There are 4 screws under some pads on the underside that can be removed if you want to take a look at the internals. It has Seed Studio's own 24 GHz millimeter wave sensor and is running on their custom Xiaomi ESP32C3. They've made it so that you can swap out the millimeter wave sensor with a few different modules that they also sell, and their documentation has a list of those different modules and what their best use case is. You can also see this empty space on their custom board, and this is for something really interesting. It's for what they call a Govee module. The Govee ecosystem is a modular system of sensors and other input devices that all use standardized connectors. They provided this space so you can add any of these modules. The modules come in standard sizes, and you can either order one large one or 2 small ones, as there are 2 Govee connectors inside the sensor. For example, you could add a PIR sensor, although there is no opening for a PIR sensor on the front plate of this housing. Or you could add something like their multi-channel gas sensor. Both of these have Govee connectors and are part of the Govee ecosystem, so you could click them in. And unfortunately, they didn't send me any of these modules to test out, so I'm not really sure what you do once you plug them in. But if you guys want to see that in a video of some kind, let me know. Okay, so quick update on this thing. I actually bought one of these Govee modules, the multi-channel gas sensor, and I connected it all up, and I tried to get it working with ESP Home and I wasn't able to. They do actually give you some examples of how to connect a light sensor and a flame sensor, but since this one is significantly different from those two, I wasn't able to figure out how to get it connected, but I think with a little bit more effort I could. This is a really cool idea, and I really wish they had sent me one of these modules. It would be fun to play with. So since this device is powered by ESP Home over Wi-Fi, it's really easy to set up. You plug it into power, and then after a few minutes, you can connect to the millimeter wave kit access point that it broadcasts using your phone or your PC. Then in a browser, you just go to 192.168.4.1, and it's going to load a startup page. There you just choose the home network that you want to connect to, put in the password, and then hit save, and it's going to connect to your Wi-Fi, and then the device should automatically show up in Home Assistant as an ESP Home device. In Home Assistant, you can see you get a bunch of different entities, and a lot of them I don't understand, but I'll go over the ones that I do. The sensitivity setting adjusts the detection distance of the presence sensor in static state. There are 3 levels for sensitivity setting, with the default level being 3. 3 has a detection radius of 4 meters, 2 has a detection radius of 3 meters, and 1 has a detection radius of 2.5 meters. The body movement parameter determines if someone is moving in the current environment. When the value is 0, the radar determines that no one's present in the environment. And when the value is 1, the radar determines that someone is present in the environment and is stationary. When the value is greater than 1, that means that someone is present in the environment and they're moving. And the higher the value, the stronger the motion. The motion distance parameter is supposed to tell you the distance to the movement or the target distance, but it only seems to report in increments of 0.5 meters and only when the underlying open function switch is on. Now, all of this stuff is sort of given to you in their documentation, but it's really not clear exactly what they're talking about. This documentation is specifically the ESP Home documentation, but I went through it and I really wasn't able to figure out what all of these different parameters are for or really how to use them. And there's just weird things like, for example, the static distance sensor is stuck at 3.28 feet. It never changes. No idea why. Anyway, the next one is a new one from Miros, and it's the Miros M600 Matter Presence Sensor. This one has both a millimeter wave sensor and a PIR sensor in a single device. The basic idea with this combination is that presence gets triggered by motion being picked up from the PIR sensor, but the presence stays alive as long as the millimeter wave sensor detects human movement. It has a nice clean look with a rectangular shaped body and a door on the back that covers the USB-C port, but flips down to act as a stand. It not only flips down at different angles, but also rotates. And it was a little bit weird to figure out at first, but I finally figured it out. Behind that, you can see a reset button. And you can also see that it has the Matter QR code on the side. It also comes with this shield that's supposed to attach to the front of the sensor and cover the bottom half of the PIR sensor for pet-proof triggering. And I was going to test this, but I don't have any pets, and the shield actually wouldn't even stay on for more than a few seconds. As soon as I tipped the PIR sensor face down, immediately the sensor would fall off. So I'm not sure if I'm missing some part that's supposed to stick it on, or if it's just not a great design. I guess I personally wouldn't rely on it as a good method of pet proofing. The claim to fame with the sensor is that it works with Amazon and Google Assistants, as well as HomeKit and Home Assistant via Matter, and specifically Matter over Wi-Fi. However, this method of integration with these smart home platforms will only expose some of the information from the sensor, and I'll show that in a second. Since this is a Matter device, you need to add it to a Matter network. You actually need to add it to a Matter network before you even start using it with the Miros app, which is really weird. Since I'm using Home Assistant, I added it there by scanning the QR code and allowing the setup to run. This took several tries, performing the exact same set of actions multiple times and getting different results each time. I feel like there's a joke about sanity here somewhere. Anyway, the third time it connected, and you can see that you only get a couple of entities in Home Assistant: presence, state, and light level. I found that once you add it to a Matter network, then you can adopt it in the Miros app. And there you can do all kinds of configuring. Once I had it all configured, I added it to Home Assistant in a different way, and that is using the third-party HACS integration called Miros LAN. This integration works locally and usually pulls in a lot more controls into Home Assistant than other methods of integration with Miros devices. Here you can see that you get a lux sensor that shows light level. You also get this presence sensor, which reports a number, but I'm not actually sure what that number means. You get presence distance, which we're going to test later, a light entity for the LED inside it, presence times, which I think is how long it has seen presence, and sensor presence motion, which I think is if the PIR detects motion. In the configuration options, you get distance input to set the max distance for the millimeter wave sensor. The MTH 1, 2, and 3 are thresholds for 3 zones, and a no body time, which is the device cooldown time. Below that, you have a sensitivity setting where 1 is responsive, 2 is balance, and 3 is anti-interference. I'm getting all this information from the app where you can actually see the information on what you're actually selecting, but you are able to control it in Home Assistant. There are 2 mode inputs for test mode and work mode. And I don't know what test mode does, but work mode switches it between 1, which is a biological mode, and 2, which is security mode. In biological mode, it only looks for humans, but in security mode, anything that triggers that PIR sensor is going to set it off. The next sensor is a Xiaomi compatible sensor from a company called XSmart, I believe, and it's a Bluetooth low energy device. It has a clean plastic housing, which is very typical for Xiaomi devices, and a magnetic articulating mount. The mount has a sticky back to stick it to a wall or other flat surface, and the base allows you to position it just the way you want, which is really nice. There's a battery cover underneath, which is a bit of a pain to open, but once you get it open, you can see the battery inside. That's right, a battery. The CR2450 battery is supposed to last for 3 years. It has 3 sensors inside of it: a millimeter wave sensor, an luminance sensor, and a passive infrared sensor. It uses the PIR sensor for initial presence detection, since that's what PIR sensors are best for, and uses the millimeter wave sensor to detect continuous human presence after the PIR has detected the motion. Adding it to Home Assistant right now is a little weird. Since it's a Bluetooth low energy device, it automatically gets detected by Home Assistant, and you can configure it via this Xiaomi BLE integration. But if you do it that way, you're not going to have any entities. In order for you to have entities to show up in Home Assistant, you actually need to install the Xiaomi Gateway 3 custom integration from Hacks, and then add your hub or your gateway there. Since this sensor is a Chinese version, you do need to make sure that your Xiaomi Mi account is set to China so that the sensor will be picked up. Once you do that, then you can add your device, which is auto-discovered via the Xiaomi BLE integration, and you're going to see those entities appear even if it takes a little bit of time. In Home Assistant, you get duration cleared, duration detected, illuminance, occupancy detected, and battery entities. Next, we have two sensors from Apollo Automation, and both of these are presence sensors, but they have different applications. If you saw my previous presence sensor video, you saw the Apollo MSR1, but this one is the MSR2. It comes with a 3D printed case and an optional articulating stand with screw holes or adhesive to mount it. Like its predecessor, it can be mounted to a wall adapter with this custom USB cable that they'll provide, and it allows you to use that power brick like a wall mount, attaching the sensor directly to the brick. If you pop the case off, you can see that it's a custom ESP32 board with an HLK LD2410B millimeter wave radar sensor attached to it. This custom board also has temperature and air pressure sensors, a lux sensor, and an optional CO2 sensor that can be added, which will also measure humidity. Mine doesn't have the CO2 sensor, which is an additional $20 over the original price. The custom board even has a piezo buzzer so it can play RTTL sounds, meaning you can play little tunes as notifications. It also has an RGB LED on it that is pretty bright and shines through that 3D printed case, meaning that you can also have visual notifications from this little sensor. This device is powered by ESP Home over Wi-Fi, so just like the Seed Studio sensor, it's straightforward to get set up. Plug it into power and then wait about a minute for it to get ready, and then connect to the access point that it broadcasts with your phone or your PC. Put in your network info and hit save, and then the MSR2 should automatically be discovered in Home Assistant. In Home Assistant, you get a ton of sensors. You get air pressure, lux, temperature, and you'll have CO2 and humidity sensors if you bought that upgrade. And you get calibration, offset, and adjustments for these as well. On top of that, you obviously have your presence sensor, still and moving target sensors, target distance sensor, and 3 zone sensors. In configuration, you can set your zone sizes, and you can turn on engineering mode so you can adjust your gate thresholds. This controls how much energy is required at various distances from the sensor for the sensor to say, okay, there is presence here. There are a bunch of other customization options, and Apollo has some decent documentation on how to tune these just right. Next, we have the MTR1, which is another presence sensor from Apollo, but like I said before, a little bit different of an application. That's because it's got a different millimeter wave sensor inside it. The purpose here is for multi-target tracking, where the MSR2 is just for general presence detection. The MTR1 also has a 3D printed case, and it's a little bit bigger than the MSR2, but one thing I really like about it is the LD2450 millimeter wave sensor not only allows for quick presence detection, but it also allows for multiple target tracking, setting zone detection, and even providing the coordinates of a target. It also has an RGB pixel, which is pretty bright behind the case, and allows for custom notifications, which is really cool. For example, if you want to have it turn red if a door is left open or green if mail was delivered, you can do that. The buzzer is nice too because, like I mentioned with the MSR2, you can make it play different tunes. I found thousands of these tunes online, and my kids were thrilled to hear the Lion King songs. But they were bummed there were no Bluey tunes. The Lux and UV sensor can be used to trigger automations too, and the optional CO2 sensor just takes it to an entirely different level. The CO2 sensor does come pre-calibrated, which is cool, but don't forget that you won't have a humidity sensor unless you buy this CO2 sensor. Like the MSR2, this one works via ESP Home over Wi-Fi, so you follow the same procedure as with the last one to get it into Home Assistant. In Home Assistant, you get a ton of sensors again. You get the RGB light, air pressure and temperature sensors, a light and UV index sensor, and then you get a bunch of entities that all have to do with the millimeter wave sensor. It has a moving target count, a presence target count, and a still target count. Then it has angle, direction, distance, resolution, speed, and X and Y coordinates for 3 different targets, meaning it can track all of this info on 3 separate targets all at the same time. It also has still, moving, and total target counts for 3 zones, which you can set up in the configuration settings. These zones are actually set up in X and Y coordinates, so you're kind of specifying little box or little rectangular areas that are the zones that you want to track. So you define the exact areas of the overall detection zone that you want to be broken into zones 1, 2, and 3. There are quite a few other sensors, but those are the basics. Also, don't forget that you'll have the CO2 and humidity sensors if you add that one. The last one comes from a company called RoomSense. It comes with a 3D printed case and it has a modular design philosophy. They've designed the inner circuit board and the case to allow for adding other modules to it. And I love this because it really lets you get creative. These products are in early stage, so the only other module I know of right now is what they call ClimateSense. I'll explain that one in a second, as they also sent that to me. The 3D printed case comes with a ball mount design which allows for articulation, and they provide a screw to exert the clamping force on the ball, which is different from a lot of the other sensors that have 3D printed mounts, and I think it's a lot better because the pressure on the ball is more consistent. On the front, you can see the PIR sensor sticking out of the middle of the faceplate, and behind it you can see the LD2410 millimeter wave sensor attached to a custom PCB. This custom circuit board also has a 7-pin breakout connector, an ambient light sensor, an ESP32S3 processor, and an RGB LED. On the back, it has a USB-C connector for power and also for serial communication. I mentioned the ClimateSense module, so let me show you how it works, as it makes use of that 7-pin breakout connector. You can see how it just pops onto the back of the main sensor and the pins go into that breakout connector, and then this cover goes over the back of it. The ClimateSense is an add-on device that adds a carbon dioxide sensor, carbon monoxide sensor, dew point, humidity, and temperature sensors, as well as particulate matter and total volatile organic compound measurements. When it comes to adding this thing to Home Assistant, the RoomSense IQ is quite a bit different than the others. It operates on Wi-Fi, but it uses MQTT to connect to Home Assistant. This means you need to have an MQTT broker set up in Home Assistant, and if you haven't done that before, there are tons of videos out there. They may be getting a little bit old showing how to do that, but it's pretty straightforward. Similarly to how we connected the previous two, you search for available Wi-Fi networks and you'll find one called RoomSense. So you connect to it with password for the password. Then you can head to a web browser and type in 192.168.255.1. And once you do that, a web-based dashboard called SiteSense appears. And here there's a spot to enter your Wi-Fi information, and further down there's a spot to add your MQTT information. You can enter your Wi-Fi credentials and hit submit, and then scroll down to the MQTT section and add your MQTT broker information. If you don't know what this stuff is, I highly recommend you watch a video by one of the other excellent smart home YouTubers on how to set up an MQTT broker with Home Assistant, and then come back to this video. On the settings page we're on, you can update firmware, turn the LED on or off, and change the sensor units. But if you click the menu icon in the upper left corner, you can click Main Dashboard. Here you can dial in the gate thresholds for the millimeter wave sensor, just like we could with the MSR2. You can set your max distance for macro and micro movement sensing, and you can adjust the cooldown, which is called timeout. You can also see live charts of the movement and light density. If you click the menu button again, you can also click the ClimateSense button, and there you have a bunch of live charts for the temperature, humidity, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, VOCs, particulate matter, and you even have a button for calibrating your CO2 sensor. All of this is well documented in the RoomSense documentation, which I highly recommend you check out if you're setting the sensor up for the first time. Now that you have the device all set up, you should see the device that has automatically appeared inside the MQTT integration. In the controls section, you get 4 text fields. Carbon monoxide status tells the status of carbon monoxide levels and is either at no alarm or carbon monoxide detected. The second one is location, which is defined in the documentation as the location of the sensor, but I'm not actually sure what that means, and it's just blank. Next, there's movement direction, which tells you if movement is toward or away from the sensor. In the sensor section, we have carbon monoxide and dioxide entities, a dew point entity, target distance entities, humidity and light entities, a PIR entity, 3 particulate matter entities for different particle sizes, a presence entity, 2 temperature entities, and a total volatile organic compounds entity. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, now the testing. While testing these, all of them seem to perform the basic function of detecting that there was presence and pretty quickly. So I'm not going to go into how fast I reacted because it's more about their sensing distance and not so much about the speed of reaction. For this video, I performed a test similar to what I did in my previous video to determine target distance accuracy. It also examines response time to a continuously moving target. First, I did a dual staircase test where I stood 5 meters away from all of the sensors, waited for 10 seconds, took a 1 meter step toward the sensors, waited another 10 seconds, took another 1 meter step, etc., all the way up to a distance of 1 meter away from the sensors, at which point I stopped for another 10 seconds and then retraced my steps in the same manner. The first thing I noticed was that the Seed Studio sensor was not reporting at all, which is really weird. After resetting it and trying it again, it still failed to report. Now, it was detecting presence, but not distance to target. The next thing you can notice is the RoomSense sensor, which is a bit laggy in its response time, and you can see it trying to catch up to the true distance at the beginning of my staircase because I had just been close to the sensors. Then, as I step away, you can see that it tracks a second or two behind all of the other readings. That's kind of weird, and maybe there's a setting in the dashboard to fix that, but I'm not sure. You also notice that the MIROS sensor doesn't report very often, really only once movement has stopped, but it is quite accurate. The MSR2 wasn't picking up a target until about 3.5 meters away, and then you can see that on the way back it was cutting out the same distance. This turned out to be a configuration issue where I had to adjust those gates that I mentioned, turning down the threshold a little bit so it wasn't ignoring the presence or the movement at those further distances. Once I did that, it was working okay, but it was consistently reporting a little bit higher distance than all the other sensors. Finally, if you look at the MTR1, you can see that it reports quite frequently and it best represents my actual movements. Very cool. In the next test, I continuously walked toward the sensors from a distance of 5 meters to 1 meter at 0.5 meters per second. Then I stood for 10 seconds and then retraced my steps at the same speed, approximately 0.5 meters per second. You can see again that the RoomSense lagged behind and had to catch up during moving, but once stationary, it was fine. Okay, so now let's talk about my favorites and my least favorites. Just a reminder, I've left links to all of these sensors in the description, so if you're interested in picking any of them up, please use those links. It helps out the channel a ton. The best budget sensor, in my opinion, is the Xiaomi compatible sensor because it's not only the cheapest, but it's also battery powered, and the battery has lasted for over a month at 100%. It doesn't give you target distances or target tracking, but it does handle basic presence, and that's all you could ask for. The company has told me though that they're working on a matter over thread version, so if you're not too keen on the whole BLE integration stuff, you could wait for that, and that should be coming out. I have no idea when, but that's something you might want to wait for. The best basic sensor, in my opinion, is the MIROS G600. It has a lot more customization in the MIROS app that I didn't cover, but it has performed super well. And the only detriment, in my opinion, is Matter. Matter just isn't developed enough yet, and I'm glad that even though there's only a couple sensors coming in with that integration, the MIROS LAN integration saves the day for us Home Assistant users, providing a ton of different customization options over good old Wi-Fi with no Matter involvement. The most accurate of these sensors, and to me the best for the price of all these sensors, is obviously the MTR1. And for my last video, the one that was most accurate was the Everything Presence Lite. Because of that, I brought the two head to head to compare them in a staircase test. What I found is that they are nearly identical, and I suppose I should have expected that since they have the same LD2450 millimeter wave radar inside them. The one that wins for most sensors in this case is either the Apollo MTR1 or the Apollo MSR2. They both start about 35 USD, but jump up to around 55 if you add on that CO2 sensor, which I would highly recommend, but it isn't necessary. So for both of these sensors, you get a really good presence sensor for under $40. While the RoomSense IQ also had a ton of different sensors, the base price without ClimateSense was $49. And when you add ClimateSense, you're going up over $100 extra just for that sensor. And while having total volatile organic compounds and particulate matter is really cool, that's still a huge chunk of change for a simple presence sensor. I really love that modular concept though, and I really wish other companies would adopt that and start making it really simple to add your own sensors. I also think that the housing could use a little bit of a redesign as it's a bit sloppy. Maybe it's just a print job because I did try reprinting it on my Bamboo P1S and it came out looking a lot nicer, but I still think that the design isn't super printable, and when you don't have the ClimateSense sensor attached, it doesn't look so great. This is just a personal thing and easily addressable. Speaking of modularity though, the one I would not recommend is the one from Seed Studio. It just doesn't seem like it's fully developed, even with the most recent firmware. I think it needs a little bit more attention to increase its stability, so I can't recommend it at this time. I wanted so badly to like it though because of that customization that's possible with the Govee ecosystem, but unfortunately this one just isn't there. So after having looked at 24 presence sensors, I never want to look at another one again. But I will say that my top two have to be the MTR1 and the Everything Presence Lite. Top two, hands down. Notice that both of those don't have a PIR sensor, and I think that the PIR sensor just isn't really necessary unless you have really big rooms or situations where you have some large area that you need to detect motion all the way across the area, but presence closer up. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you guys for sticking around, and I really hope you enjoyed this video, even though I know I'm just scratching the surface of what these sensors can actually do. Again, please don't forget to use links in the description if you want to buy any of these, as this is the main way this channel is funded. Also, special shout out to my channel members for all of their support, which means a lot. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. See ya.